Where are the positives? You gotta at least give us one.
Puns, and then people
You're
are like,
here?
oh, that's a negative.
More opinioused is technically better for a show such as
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm going hard.
Yeah.
On every topic, I'm taking a firm stance.
No matter what.
No matter what, I'll take a firm stance.
Even if you have no basis
Yes.
for that.
Half
Exactly.
full or half empty? A glass.
Half full.
Why?
Because I think the default state of a glass is empty. Like, most glasses don't hold water or coffee or whatever. So you
Ooh.
actively put liquid into it, which means you've half
Hold
filled it.
water, kind of like your argument.
Oh!
Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, so we're going to start with global
Now
news.
that everyone is tuned out.
We're going to start with global news as we usually do. We haven't talked about SKT in a while, and I think it's time to re-hit on this story. So essentially what's happened is Faker has been subbed out for, I believe, the last 6 matches. And in those 6 matches, they have gone 4-2 with Pirean. Most recently last night, actually losing to the Phreak of Phreaks 1-2 in that best of 3. But it's more about kind of having the conversation of what SKT is doing. Because at first, people were completely against the idea. They were saying, what are you doing, SKT? There's no way you're ever going to do anything now. But now that they've started winning with them, people are kind of finding reasons why it could be good. So one of the things that SKT has said is that the team plays differently with Faker in, and they wanted to see how the team plays with a different style of mid laner in Pirean, who's not as aggressive and isn't as demanding in lane. And then there was a Reddit thread that talked about this thing called the Ewing theory. And this is something that I was fairly familiar with because I used to read Bill Simmons years ago. And this is a story essentially about the New York Knicks when Patrick Ewing was their best player. He was a center, and he was one of the best players in basketball. So they were actually the 8th seed heading into the playoffs, which is the lowest seed you can have going into a playoff. And he got injured. So people think, okay, they're already not good, and they just lost one of the best players in the NBA. Surely they're terrible. But what ended up happening is the team went on what you could honestly now call a miracle run and won a bunch of series in the playoffs before eventually losing right at the end.
Yeah.
And the theory then becomes, well, okay, Patrick Ewing is a good player, but in fact, the rest of the team is pretty good too. They were just never able to play the way that would exemplify their skills. So the Knicks started playing a lot more up-tempo. They started shooting more threes. They played a smaller lineup because they didn't have this guy taking the majority of their offensive touches, even if he can still be a really good player. So people have tried to apply that to Faker for this Ewing theory of saying Pirean allows the other guys to actually shine. So what do you think about this whole situation?
I mean, I think it's kind of interesting, and the comparison that he's using is kind of like, okay, well, everyone's going to camp Faker, so your jungler kind of has to play around Faker, and it changes the whole style of the game. So, like, I definitely see the correlation. And to your point, like, it does allow players to have more flexibility, right? Like, when Pirean is in the lineup, your jungler's not going to feel like you have to play through them. It's maybe more opportunity for your bottom lane to carry. Like, it's more opportunity for people to kind of step into the spotlight and actually try to, take more of the resources and take over the game.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it can be a meta-based thing as well, right? Like, if it is more of a bot lane focused meta, and I think in general people have been talking about the fact that mid lane is not really how the game has been won as often lately, I would say.
Sure.
When you look at like Jensen and Bjergsen, they have not been taking over games for very often like they had been in the past. That seems to be kind of less frequent. So having a more passive mid laner, whether it's Faker playing a different style or just subbing in Pirean who's going to play more defensively, may allow you to actually focus on what is more important. It may allow your bottom lane to kind of play more aggressively because the jungler is playing around them. So I think there is something to it. But the other part of this this post, and he's like, the problem with the Ewing theory is that the success is usually temporary. There's a burst that makes you think the team is going to be fine without the superstar, but then they are figured out because there is a reason that you play, Patrick Ewing. There is a reason that you play Faker. There is a reason that you kind of have these guys in there. And, the fact that everyone is so prepared and so like, Faker's success is so well documented, does kind of work against him too.
Yeah, so the thoughts I majorly have is, one, I think there is sort of like an innate play style for a player that, like, if Patrick Ewing is taking the ball all the time, but the rest of his team is good 3-point shooters, it's like, well, you're just like nerfing the rest of your players because they can do these things, you're not allowing them to do that. And maybe with SKT, like, yes, if Bang got ganks, maybe he could win more games, but like everyone refuses to gank any lane but Faker. It's like, okay, well, that's your team playing badly. And if the game is bot lane focused, Faker should be able to learn to play Lulu and sit in a turret if he has to. Like, I feel like Faker should be better than Pirean on Pirean's best champion and best playstyle. Like, if you're actually the best player of all time and you're not washed up, and I don't think Faker is, then like you should just be able to play the Pirean style, but with Faker, who's ostensibly 5-10% better or whatever. So that's like my general idea on like SKT should be able to do this. Now, if they're not able to, it's like, okay, maybe Faker can't play defensively, or like you're talking about teams getting figured out. Like maybe like the idea of you have to camp for Faker because Faker's going to get camped because he's going to go 0-6 because he's getting camped. Doesn't Pirean go 0-6 if he's getting camped? Like, can that play style not do the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Or is Pirean successfully playing back as Faker should have been, right? And you have to like then go through, okay, well, how is the game actually being played differently? What actions are now different? Shouldn't Faker be able to do those actions? Shouldn't the other players be able to do those actions? And
Exactly.
And that's a yes or a no statement. Like, there is, I think, totally a world where that statement is no, that some players just don't play well defensively. I know I don't, for example. And like, no matter how hard I try, I don't do that well.
Yeah, and I think that there is some validity in the fact that SKT will just naturally play different when this legend isn't in the mid lane.
Sure.
Like, you have to step up. You don't have his voice in the game. He makes a suggestion, oh, hey, maybe we should do this. If Faker makes a suggestion, it's actually in order.
Sure.
Right? Whereas if Pirean makes a suggestion, it's just that. It's just a suggestion. But that kind of all comes down to coaching.
Yes.
And if Coma realizes that this is a bad thing, he should be able to tell the team to act that way, and they should get used to it.
Yeah.
Because I think Faker is not saying players can't get worse over time or get better over time, but Faker should be better than Pirean in every situation. And I think it's okay that Coma and SKT was in a bit of a panic with all the games they'd lost and wanted to shake things up. But especially after this game last night, where they lost to Phreak, I think it's time for that experiment to end. But they can still take the learnings, right? Their team is better when their jungler is a little bit unlocked. Their team is better when they can get bang fed on carries. Their team is better when Tal gets ganks in the top lane. And their team is better when the mid laner has more restraint in lane and isn't making that universal play style. But Faker is also better. So play him and then go forward. That's my take.
I think it's really interesting because like totally agreed that Faker is a much better player than Pirean, right? But like I just like talking about like the theoretical, kind of situations and applying this to multiple situations is kind of interesting to me because you say that it's like, okay, well, if the player is better, then they should just do what the other player can do better in all situations, right? And like in the Faker Pirean situation, maybe that's just true, right?
Sure.
But like looking at a separate situation, you said yourself, you're not very good at playing defensively, right? And I think that even with amazing players, there are guys that they see those opportunities and they see those openings, and like that's how Faker became so great, right? It was always about Faker punishes you for every tiny little mistake. He gets more advantages in mid lane. He draws all that pressure, but then he avoids it and he's still getting kills. He still is relevant, right? He's still doing all these things.
Sure.
And so it can be very hard to then just like turn that off, right? This is how I got all my success. This is how I became the greatest player in the history of like one of the most popular games of all time.
Oh yeah.
Right? Now don't do that. Now when you see that guy step too far and you're like, I got him. No. Just go into your turret and give up the CS, and and that's something that's hard, I think, for people to turn off. And in those situations where, and this is again not specifically about this situation, because maybe Faker is going to do that, and maybe that's great. But if you have a player who is worse, like by most of the metrics, but is willing to play that playstyle, and that playstyle is better, and your star player is struggling with it, then in those situations, I think it can increase the performance of your team. And that is what is kind of interesting about that theory to me. But it's all dependent on play style and mindset, because there's so many times where I talk to a coach or I talk to a player or I talk to whatever, and I'm like, well, why don't you just do this, right? And they're like, oh, well, they don't want to, right? And it's like, or they don't think they should, or why did you fight there? Oh, well, because I thought I could outplay it. You know what I mean? It's just those things that are like kind of built into you, that it's not necessarily something where it's like you went through the whole scenario and like laid it all out and they're like, yep, this is the correct decision. It's just you saw it and you did it.
Well, here's a scenario then, kind of jumping off that, and I'm asking this question to you, Phreak, is going back to the Ewing analogy.
Okay.
He's a 7 foot tall, 260 pound player who is clearly not going to be as fast as a smaller player, right? In basketball, you actually have these archetypes that can't change. Like Patrick Ewing is never going to be able to be a perimeter player who shoots threes and gets back on defense super quickly. He's going to be a post player who slows down the tempo of the game and shoots a lot. How much does that translate to a League of Legends player? Because we see it's a person with a mouse and keyboard, and theoretically, everything just channels through that.
Sure.
But the years of conditioning that Faker has put in to become the player that he is it comparable to like, oh, now he is this? We're just going to say now.
Are
he's
you
Patrick
a Huni
Ewing,
or are you an Impact?
Right.
Or is he actually this super versatile player who can be a 6'2" point guard as well as a 7 foot tall center?
Sure. I think if you are like and this is not actually saying it to Faker, like if you're the greatest of all time in a certain way, I think
League of Legends.
Yeah, I think you can do this. Like the example I use was the Samsung White 2014 Worlds run, where Pawn I felt like could play more styles than Faker, for example. I thought he was actually in that year the best mid laner in the world because he could do it all. He could actually do everything. And I thought like he had a really good run because I actually thought like he had that breadth to him. I do think though in general, I'm watching a lot of esports and like I follow Counter-Strike a lot, for example, is like sometimes you just get like a group of players that like actually work better together and just everyone just has their habits. Like that's a fact. Like we're all human beings. We're not robots. Like Challenger player X is not the same as Challenger player Y. Even if they play the same role and have the same LP, they have different strengths and weaknesses. And you can't just magically be as good as the other guy at mechanics and as good as the other guy at decision making. You are a sum of your parts. And like Faker's are some of his parts and Bangs some of his parts, and like you're going to have weaknesses in your mental game. Otherwise, you would be the greatest of all time, not just the best AD carry in Korea or the third best AD carry in Korea. Like there are holes to every single player's gameplay. That's just a fact because we're human.
Yeah, and taking this into account, people move over to the North American LCS and see another team with a historically strong mid laner struggling. The team is TSM and the player is Bjergsen, and they've now gone through a lot of different junglers on TSM, from Grig to Mike Young, and it goes back like Amazing, Santorin. There's been a ton of them, and people are saying, hey, if Faker was the, quote, problem on this team of pretty good players in SKT that wasn't working, why doesn't TSM do the same thing with Bjergsen? Haunter's a really good top laner. Mithy and Sven have been great in the bot lane. What should TSM just sub out Bjergsen? Just let's discuss that theory and what you think about it.
So first of all, I'd say no. I mean, I don't think that it's a Bjergsen problem personally. I feel like it's a systemic problem or like an organizational problem or a coaching problem, whatever you want to say. And you know, then the argument maybe can be made that hey, Bjergsen is the one causing that, and that's something that I just don't have insight into. So like I can't really comment on. But to me, if like you know my interpretation of what Reddit thinks and like what community thinks is that TSM is not aggressive enough. They don't have any playmakers, so they kind of sit back and they just like slowly lose, right? That is my impression of how people look at that team, and somewhat similar to how I look at the team at times too. And like I feel like that is then something that the coaches need to be able to fix, right? Where they need to be able to like build confidence in, like Mark was talking about on the desk, and there were issues with Curse where in scrims they just play against all these teams and they just wait for them to make a mistake, because in scrims people are playing fast and loose, and then they capitalize on those mistakes, they punish them, and then they win the game. But then on stage, those same mistakes aren't appearing, and people are playing more like, you know, high percentage plays, and then all of a sudden you need someone to be the like the aggressive guy to make those maybe more risky plays. Maybe it's the 60-40 or whatever it is. Those are the plays you have to be going for, and that's something that your coach needs to then retrain your team for. And that's what I feel like TSM needs, whether it should be Grig, whether it should be Haunter, whether it should be Mithy. I don't think it matters, but I do think you need that guy, and I think that the team needs to then go through that kind of relearning phase, rebuilding phase of maybe they lose a lot more scrims, maybe they lose more on stage, but you have to build that up because you can't just play 100% plays in League of Legends because they don't exist.
Yeah, and also to go back to the other analogy about strengths and weaknesses, if TSM's weakness is playing too passively, is your substitute for Bjergsen going to work towards fixing that?
Yeah.
And the idea of SKT, if we're going to take the assumption that that is a decent experiment, Faker was too aggressive. They needed someone a little bit more passive so the other people could be more aggressive.
TSM Golden Glue. I mean, it's too late now, but like you think about mid laners that are like LCS ready. Like Golden Glue's had a better summer split than Bjergsen. I'd be willing to suggest
in his
that,
two games.
He played more than 2 games. He played some bot lane and some mid. I could have because he
4.
played
I
the
think it
whole
was
like
4
Keith
games.
group.
All
At least.
All right, you're right.
Like he
It's
solo
like 6
killed some guy. Like I think he took out Fevin or something. Like
Yeah.
I think he legitimately has had a good like several group of games. And if you really need an aggressive player, I think Golden Glue is like, well, he's a resident, which you need because your entire bot lane's European. Not that Bjergsen's not, but he's a resident. I mean, that would be like the out of the box solution. Like, look,
6
he's ready,
games.
Sure.
right? Yeah,
6 games, 1 and 5.
sure. Because I mean,
Cloud9
those were
lost all
like
their
Keith,
games, yeah.
etc. But and and Sven's going to keep throwing shade. Don't worry, that's fine. But
keep going.
I mean,
Opinions. That's all I
anyway,
have.
yeah. The point is, I agree, right? And it's
Yeah.
funny because TSM has had a habit of shaping their players into passive ones, like Santorin and Mike Young and all these other junglers they've had. Like
Yeah.
TSM thinks, no, you're going to be a ward. You're going to be a KDA king.
It's a
and you're gonna
Nidalee
die
Lee
0
Sin guy,
times.
but now he's playing Sejuani every
Yeah,
game.
well, he's playing Nidalee Lee Sin, but not ganking, right? Like that's what's happening. And now they have Greg, who actually like plays more of that style, like sort of natively. So they've even like pulled more of that out of the team, and like weirdly, it's now the worst they've ever been, even though he actually fits that style more perfectly. Like
Yeah.
he's used to the more passive style ever so slightly.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also a chance that he is too deferential to what Bjergsen wants. Grig dual queues with Bjergsen. He doesn't dual queue with Hanser. He doesn't dual queue with Mithy or Sven,
Yeah.
right? He's Bjergsen. And that could be bad, but I also just don't think that taking out Bjergsen and putting in a Blaze Olive fixes TSM's issues. Even if Bjergsen is partially to blame for the passivity, it's not the same situation, so I don't think TSM should even consider subbing up Bjergsen at this juncture. That's my opinion on it.
At the end of the day, the org has to fix it. And if it's Bjergsen that's saying, no, don't gank. No, don't go for that play, then they need to drill that out of him. But he still has a higher they still have a higher chance to win with this guy. He's the best player that's ever been in the North American LCS, I think. Like, most successful.
Do you think he still is of the split though? Like I know he has
Not the
like,
split,
his ceiling
no.
is there.
No, but I mean, has Faker been the best mid laner in career, right? It's like it's the parallel, right? I still think that Bjergsen is capable of that level. Do I think that Bjergsen is washed up? No. Do I think that Faker is washed up? No.
Yeah.
I don't. And I think that the team is not doing well, and it can be, whoever's fault it is. I think that Bjergsen with the right pieces around him, or Bjergsen with a team that is playing the proper way, however that is achieved, I think still can reach that super high level again.
I guess the thought I bring up then to like stay on this one is like 2014 SKT didn't even make Worlds. Wouldn't you have liked a Pirean that split or like that year, right? Like, like you can be the best player, but like, hey, if you're having a slump or like the best way to play the game doesn't suit your native play style, like I don't even know if that was true in 2014. There might have been other reasons. I don't remember SKT's trajectory that well.
They,
but like
after 2014, essentially got rid of everyone.
Yeah.
Except for Faker and
yeah,
Bengi.
and hey, maybe everyone else was the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying like yes.
So do you think
every
TSM
team
should
has
sub
problems.
Bjergsen out?
I think they need to find the quickest way to change their play style, and if it actually is Bjergsen can't be top fast enough, right? Like you must make playoffs, or you're not. You have no postseason.
And I think
whatever the fastest way is, yes.
Yeah, I think that's true. If the fastest way to change their playstyle was to take out Bjergsen and find a different leader who could fix their issues, then yeah.
And it also just adds more issues, right? It's like, what is your goal? Is your goal as TSM to like just scrape into 6th place with a Blaze Olive as your mid laner and then just like lose in the playoffs, or like, or maybe theoretically you get to Worlds somehow or whatever with a Blaze Olive? Like, is he the guy who is going to stand up to to these incredible mid laners internationally, right? Like, is he the guy that brings TSM their international success? I would say no.
No, I don't. I don't think he's going to handle.
But neither is Pirean for SKT, in my opinion.
And that's why but I also don't agree with them doing that long term, right? Like, and again, it just comes out into goals, right? Like, is your goal to just get like the most amount of wins possible right now, and maybe that
I think 100% yes in every split ever. Like I think teams are too long term focused. Like the idea of like, I mean, I talked about this with Rift Rivals, where it's like, well, we want our best chance of going to Worlds, so we're going to tank Rift Rivals, and it's like, okay, tank the only international tournament you've ever played, cool. Right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's just very flawed, because there's so much turnover every year anyway, and maybe with franchising it changes. Although we've had like 25 players of turnover this split already with franchising. It's like, well, it turns out people are still making in fact, they're making more roster moves.
Yeah.
It's like, are you really like, no, we got to find our 5 now for 2019. I don't buy it. So I think it's completely reasonable to always say, no, we're going to win our very next game, and that's all we're going to care about.
I just think that limits you so much in terms of like actual like play styles and like looking forward, right? If you're always trying to win just the game in front of you and you never look any further than that, then I think like the best strategy is almost always play what you're already comfortable with, and like don't ever branch out, like, because in the short term, you usually do not get enough return on like putting that 50 games in on Aatrox to learn that or whatever, right?
I think it depends on the situation
Yeah.
completely. I think right now, with TSM sitting at 5-7, tied for 6th, they absolutely have to win every game
6
because
is
there's 6
infinitely better
left.
than 8.
Otherwise, they don't go to Worlds. But for Echo Fox or TL or Hunter Thieves, who are 8-4 or 7-5, they can be a little bit more long-term focused.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I guess I should temper it somewhat. I agree that if you have room to go, then you have room to say, okay, let's look a little bit farther. But you still don't know what the game's going to look like in 4 months, whatever, right? Like the world's meta could be entirely different. Like you think about last year where like there were almost no changes. Turns out Ardent Sensor was what you should have been playing the entire year and you never figured it out. And it's like, okay, but then someone showed you Ardent Sensor, so like you had to change anyway. Even if you were looking forward, no one saw it, even if they're looking forward. So I feel like there's so much to always be discovered in a game with 140 something champions that like you can try to place your bet 6 months down the line, but like you're probably going to be wrong. So why look more than a patch ahead?
All right. One more thing we want to talk about as far as global news is there was a Piglet interview with Inven. We talk about Piglet also because he has SKT connections all the way back to 2013. He's basically been in NA for 3.5 years, but he actually is a Korean import who had been playing the majority of the split in Academy, and he got the call up to LCS this last week. Lost both games, even though they had difficult opponents. But it was a very interesting interview because Piglet is always very blunt with all of his opinions, whether or not we agree with it. Among the things that he talked about was that he thought the game was basically over when they had chunked out Zyra Khan to low health at level 1. That was before Vulcan took 2 turret shots as Tom Kenshin died. Then he says, well, then it was lost. He had some interesting thoughts on jungle. He had some interesting thoughts on whether or not Korea is playing the game the right way. He actually thinks laners play too passive, and he is kind of playing the right way. What were your thoughts on this Piglet interview? You can find it on Reddit. It's an Inven interview if you want to read it yourself, but we're going to talk about some of the main points.
I just find it entertaining to read the Piglet interviews because he is blunt, right? But it's also like, to me, like my opinion on Piglet is very different than like Piglet's opinion on Piglet, right? And I think that's probably true of a lot of people. Like when I read this, I get the sense that he still thinks he is the very best, right? I get the sense that, again, like you talking about like, is Korea playing right or who's kind of doing it right? And he's talking very much about like, no, you should be playing aggressively, and like in principle, I like it. He's saying, oh, you should get 2 kills to give up 1 kind of thing, like because you're playing aggressive and you're punishing them and you're making it pay off. Which I do agree with that.
Yeah,
that kind of mindset, right? Like I think that you can't just play 100% risk averse. Or to his point, it does make you super predictable, right? If the only time the bot lane ever takes 1 step forward is when their jungler is behind them, well, then guess what? When they take 1 step forward, I'm going to take 2 steps back because I know what's happening, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is very cool, but I also think that like, I think it's kind of delusional. Like the game is over when I like got some poke on Zyra Khan at level 1.
Yeah.
The team never plays through me, or like we would be able to snowball the game very easily. All these NA junglers don't really know how to play. Like he was very complimentary to Lyra, which was interesting because Lyra's had a horrible split, right? I also think it's kind of interesting, like his thoughts on solo queue, because Tim, he says he's never very interested in climbing in solo queue. And he referenced the fact that he was Diamond 1 when he won his world championship. He says he's been Diamond 1 in North America. I don't know what his current rating is right now. But
We'll find out.
like either way, he says he has been. I don't know if that means he is. But it's one of those things where it's like, Korean players always have the reputation of like they're the grinders, right? Like you finish the scrims, and the Koreans, like you talk to any of the North American players, and they're always talking about the Korean import on their team is playing more than everyone. They're like always in there for more solo queue. They're always trying to climb the ladder. That's like the work ethic. You listen to interviews from Impact, they talk about it's a mindset thing. It's like people don't work hard enough, etc. And to hear Piglet say that he doesn't actually think that solo queue really matters that much, and isn't really linked to your prowess in professional play was kind of interesting to me, because
Even though he is a grinder.
Yeah.
Like I know when I talked to Mark, Piglet played more solo queue than anyone else on the team and worked harder.
He just doesn't think
he
he
just
needs to
didn't
climb.
He felt like he didn't need to climb. That's
Two thoughts on that real quick, actually. So one, I actually wish people use solo queue more to practice and test the waters. I think plenty of players do this a little bit. Like I looked at Double If's match history recently, and like he had some Vayne games, some Draven games. He played some mages. Like he actually kind of played a fair bit of variety out there. And I think he's starting to learn Quinn as well, seeing Sneaky play it. And I think that's like what you should be doing is like, hey, this champion seems good. Let me get reps on it, feel comfortable. Maybe I'll bring it in scrims, in the day or two. I think it's really, really smart. I think also like for a lot of the Korean imports, like it can be really lonely. Like You know, sometimes you maybe don't feel comfortable speaking English. Sometimes maybe you're the only Korean player on your team. In you know, Piglet's case, at least Lyra is like another Korean speaker on his team, but like that can be really tough. You're in a foreign country, even if you've been here for several years. Like that can still just feel a little alienating. You're like, well, but the language I do speak is League of Legends, and like I can feel comfortable and at home playing League for 5 hours. Like that could very well be part of it. And I don't know. I don't talk to these guys very much, but like I can see that just being sort of more comfortable. But I mean, both those things are still positive, right? I think playing solo queue is still valuable. But yeah, you're not gonna like learn rotations playing solo queue against some like 200 LP master tier players.
Yeah. He did also mention like the highlight of the big quote from the interview was the fact that someone in the off season had promised him something. During the interview, it basically sounded like someone in Korea had told him, "Yo, practice up, you'll get a tryout for this LCK team." And then it fell through. So he kind of missed the boat on all of the starter positions, signing an NA. Everyone already had 80 carries. All the Korean teams had their rosters full. So he feels like this is a little bit of a lost year. So I think that is a sad story. I don't think we can really speculate on it anymore because we don't know who the person is or any of those things. But to the other point, when I hear Piglet's answers, he is still 100% Piglet for all of the reasons he was good in the past and also all of the reasons he was bad in the past. Like, this guy is not a good teammate, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He always thinks he's the best player on the team. I've never really heard him truly acknowledge a mistake or a flaw. Like, even in this interview, when he said that, "Oh, I didn't call for the jungler's help. And it's because I have been told that I asked too much for the jungler's help in the past." He didn't say that, "Oh, I actually asked too much in the past and that was detrimental." No. In the past, he had the right idea, but his teammates couldn't handle being told the correct thing.
Yeah.
Right? It would be so frustrating to be on a team with him, in my opinion.
Reading this as his teammate, I mean, like,
he blamed his support 100%.
Yeah,
he blamed his jungle 100%.
Exactly. He says, like, the opponent, Zyra Khan, had only half their health at level 1. I thought the game was already over at that point. They can't beat us in that situation. However, Volka was saving his flash and died. If he used it properly, Zai and Tom Kench would have exchanged flashes, so we would have the initiative, but the game went wrong after he died. It's like...
And that statement is fine because Vulcan completely misplayed, but it's just a series of those things where he never says... Like, for instance, in the game where he was playing on Ezreal, where he was 40 minutes in and he ran face-checked through fog, chasing a kill, and died to 4 people. Whose fault was that?
Yeah.
Oh, our jungler didn't have the appropriate vision, so I was forced to chase the kill. Like, that's the type of explanation I would expect.
I mean, the Baron one is funny. He's like, in the late game, I told my teammates to not give up Baron. It's like, well, thank you. Like,
congrats.
Okay. Like, well, fuck. I thought I was supposed to do that, right?
Shot calling, guys. Just like have perfect vision control.
Yeah, just don't give up Baron.
I'm gonna split push bot.
Don't let them crack the base.
Yeah.
We're gonna win.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think honesty, and I think that like that is good. But there's a certain level of like, there's a reason that people aren't this blunt in interviews, and it's because I think it's really bad for team morale. It's the same reason that like you don't want to trash your teammates publicly. Like even if I'm playing with Phreak and I know he's a boosted animal, right? And he's running it down
for sure.
I should tell Phreak, hey, stop feeding so much, instead of then going to the public, right? Because it's just like, as the teammate, you read that and it's going to feel so bad, right? Like it's hard to then not have tension between those players. It's hard to then have that trust still there, I feel like. So that's really kind of the downside of that.
Any thoughts before we move on to patch 8.15, Phreak?
The real quick thought about him, like, oh, dude, I think Lyra's super good. Lyra seems to be an early aggressive player. Like back when he was actually all LCS jungler, right? He was super aggressive, playing super hard. And Clutch is like the slowest or second slowest team in the LCS. This seems to be a mismatch. And Piglet's like, no, I want to go hard all the time. I want to trade flash under their turret to keep lane pressure. Yeah, Lyra's pathing's good. Yeah, he's an aggressive early jungler. And so there's a huge mismatch between Vivivin, who has like almost negative forward percentage. Like he's behind his own turret more than he's, past the river practically. It's like there is a clear mismatch in how people want to play the game, within Clutch itself, and then even with this part of Clutch.
I like that.
I don't know what their identity should be. I like aggressive teams, but like
Yeah.
they're out TSMing TSM.
And Piglet thinks Lyra is good because Lyra plays the
Aggressive.
way Piglet wants to play.
Yeah.
And if there's a jungler who doesn't play that way, even if you can say it's more effective, he's just not going to think that player's
Yeah.
good. That's an interesting observation. On to patch 8.15.
Cool.
David Turley, you
Hi.
are usually the patch master. You
The
make
Phreak Show.
long
Yeah.
videos about it as well as
do.
short videos about it.
That's true.
A
Do you
mix
make
of the
medium
two.
length videos about
I
it?
don't. Well, I mean,
That's the
Dives
dive.
is long. No, that's as long as my patch rundowns.
Yeah, stay
They're all
away.
one
Stay
hour.
away. That's our niche.
Yeah.
Essentially, our
That's
niche
the-
is
yeah.
the 10-minute patch discussion. That's
Oh,
That's all we've
right.
got. Stay
10
away.
to 15 where we talk about some
yeah.
of the changes, but not all of them.
Cool. Yeah, my quick highlights. Fizz is back to about as strong or maybe a bit stronger than he was before the changes. Where the W is like front loaded but has an on hit effect afterwards. Fizz seems really good. I don't know if we'll see him in pro. I feel like we're seeing enough assassins that maybe. Lee Sin didn't seem to have actually that big of movement off the patch. Basically, he's power spikes more at 9, scales more with attack damage, worse against tanks, better against squishies. So take that as you will. But it didn't seem to move win rate very much in the patch so far. Maybe that's going to be like build learnings overall. Color work looks cool.
What is your what is the thing that you think is the most interesting or most impactful?
Okay, the most interesting thing to me is crit items got basically shortened. If your build is Stormrazor, i.e. Zeal, you pay 700 less gold for that build path, which is substantial. That's 2 minutes roughly.
Right.
400 gold per minute is a pretty standard.
Let's dive into that a little bit then,
Yeah.
because in LCS last week, I think we said Heimerdinger was the only mage bot we saw
Yeah, if
in-
I recall, there was one mage bot. It was Heimer.
in 10 games, which is 20 different bot lane champions. We saw one mage in NA,
Yeah.
who was honestly talking to players. Most of the teams realized, oh yeah, our Marksmen players just kind of suck at mages. So they almost abandoned learning them in the first place. Whereas I think in LCK and EU, we're still seeing a slightly higher percent of mages. But what impact does this really have? Because this is a crit marksman change rather than a marksman change. And a lot of the marksmen we had been seeing weren't necessarily crit marksmen.
Well, Jin has been pretty big. Zaya has still been pretty big. Like I think those two alone, like to me, and I still do think that there
Quinn
is
games.
room for like some others to come in. Yeah, like Quinn and Jinx and these sorts of champions. To me, I feel like this is the death blow for mages, at least in the bot lane, at least in North America. Maybe it'll still stay popular, but like I look at Stormrazor and it's like, yes, it is like, you know, losing some AD and attack speed and so on, but it's 400 gold cheaper, and that feels so big to me. That first item completion feels so big to me that like if you're completing those items faster, I think people don't really care that they're like a little bit worse, because how many games are you really getting to true 6 items anyway? It's very few.
Yeah. So I'm looking at Games of Legends. Shout out to that website. It's great. So the top like 8 presence bot laners in 8.14 across top 5: Varus, Ezreal, Swain, Heimer, Lucian, Jhin, Ryze, Zaya, Kai'Sa, Vladimir. And Vladimir's like 1 pick 2 bans. There's only so many games in
But
8.14.
what's
Phreak
the-
just started.
What's the play percentage of the top 2? Because you mentioned 2 marksmen before.
Yeah,
you
so the
mentioned
presence
mage.
for Varus Ezreal is 65-62, and then it goes down to 35 for Swain. So there's no consensus. Varus Ezreal are ones who actually don't build crit almost at all. Varus can, but we don't usually see him build that way.
Varus actually has 3 different play styles, so he's a flex pick in
Did
himself.
you see the Ezreal post, by the way? Ezreal has lost 13 games in a row in the NA LCS.
That's funny. I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I always think Ezreal's garbage. I don't
Ezreal's a 31% win rate as
Yeah,
a champion
I just have
in pro.
Yeah. Well, also, yes, Ezreal has not been the best.
yeah.
And pro win rates are usually somewhat suspect. I'd say they have
Of course.
maybe like a 20% variance towards
13
actual
losses in
power.
a row, though. It's
13
like,
losses in a row,
ooh,
dude.
there might be something there.
And the situations in which you're picking Ezreal are often in the situations where, well, they got a really good bot lane, and we're just going to kind of put this thing over here so we're not getting smashed. Whenever you're in that situation, you've probably already lost. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's interesting because I think, especially in NA, I agree. I think we're kind of back to 80 carries, which has a lot of knock-on effects to the way the rest of the game works. It means you're less required to have a physical damage mid laner or top laner. It means Orianna is much more easy to blind pick. There's a chance we get the whole Orianna, Azir.
Yeah.
Then we'll see Cassiopeia come in there.
Oh, no,
right?
Orianna is the most played mid laner in 8.14 across the world.
And that could also be another reason we were seeing more bot lane carries, right? Like she is a protection champion and an enchanter as well as a control mage.
Yeah.
So I get a little bit sad
I'm sad.
about this.
Yeah, but that's NA exclusive, right? So like if you're looking at 814 stats for that, right? It's like, okay, well, NA got 10 games in, and like Varus's sample of picks and bans total is 17. So
Right.
NA is like most of that.
But
right?
the question is not like A14, right? The question is so on A14, NA was already almost only marksman, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I think this pushes it to basically only marksman. Maybe you see like the odd Heimerdinger or whatever. The question is more like how does this actually affect the game as a whole, right? Like, does this change things globally? Because these are big pushes, I think, towards marksman having that kind of extra power.
I guess here's the question. We can predict what we think will happen in NA.
Yeah.
And we can also predict what is the best way to play the game, right? If those two things are the same or if those two things are different. Do you have thoughts on that? Like, I think that if Swain isn't changed, if Vladimir isn't changed, if Fiddleheimer isn't changed, those are still viable, playable bot lanes.
Yeah.
And can be actually best in some situations. I don't think NA will play those picks, though, aside from Golden Guardians.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are the least reliable of the major regions to look at for like meta reads. So I actually like went and looked at it. So Varus is 8 picks, 9 bans, #1 bot laner in pro play. Half his picks and half his bans are in NA.
Right.
He's 4 picks, 4 bans in NA. So if NA just like didn't have Varus, okay, now he's actually like the #6 bot laner, right? He's #1 only because of our region. By the way, weakest region, right? So like, I mean, we already
Take that
got
back.
I mean,
Smash World.
First
Phreak.
of all, how dare you?
First of all, totally accurate based on historical evidence. You know, so I mean, I don't know. I'm always like pretty quick to malign players for like not doing things correctly because I think whatever, it's hard to do things correctly, but like we're clearly super hard on Varus right now as a region, and that's like biasing worldwide stats. Be like, oh yes, the #1 champion's Varus. Well, #1 in NA, and he's like there and everywhere else. So I don't know. I think mages are clearly still viable, right? I think it's clearly still fine. I don't even think funneling's dead, but people think it is. Like, I don't know how much people have tried to funnel. Maybe it actually is.
You
and
have to
extended a little
funnel
bit.
completely differently. You can't do the old funnel, but the idea of 2 smites gold sharing, and then if you have Monster Hunter, you are now the jungler, and if you don't have Monster Hunter, you are the laner until you complete your jungle item, in which case all bets are off.
Yeah, maybe
that would
so.
be like the new way of funneling.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, maybe by Worlds, you know, we figure that out overall. But
I mean, you and I'm down if you want to go practice that.
dude, I'm
can
down
experiment
for
it
sure.
after.
Every week he's trying to recruit people. He's gonna play a
Dude,
moo.
I love your 5 pick. Let's do something weird stuff. I'm totally down, chat.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, my general read though is I think we know NA doesn't have a very good grasp on things like. Huni tried to play Renekton into Aatrox twice because he played the matchup once or whatever. But it's like you can look online and see that Fiora is the best matchup. Turns out Optic did that, and hey, Dokla won 2 games split pushing, right? Like the team that actually innovated and did things that were smart was like in 9th place and then went 2-0. Like it's not that hard to like actually innovate in ways that are like actually backed up by data, but not every team does this.
It's funny, and I know it is innovation for pro play, but it's always funny to me because it's like a lot of times I see people online and it's like, wow, what a revolutionary pick of this Fiora and Yorick, and I'm like, these are two like it's the best matchup into that, and then it's like. I think Gangplank versus Yorick is maybe the second best or second worst matchup rather for Gangplank. It's like, you know, these are just solo queue win rate things, right? It's like, it's not that hard to figure out. They didn't have to like go into the shop and, you know, come up with a great plan that you just go on Lolalytics and you just sort by counters and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I try this.
Which is very weird that like teams have analysts and don't do this kind of stuff. I'm actually looking it up right now and it's like, Gangplank, quick, everyone pop quiz. Gangplank solo queue win rate into Yorick is what?
45.
44.
42%. There are not 58% win rate champions in League of Legends. It's actually obnoxious.
Yeah.
Right?
I will also say though that like I agree with you.
Thanks.
Different in pro play,
But
of course.
to couch the statement a little bit, there, like for instance, Gangplank recently in pro has become a lane bully, and that's because people are taking either Kleptomancy or Grasp, but then they're specifically taking Corrupting Potion, Time Warp Tonic, and Biscuits. And they just run at you, and they press Q, and then they auto-attack you. And because they have like 85 potions that have bonus effectiveness, they actually push you out of lane and then get rich. So like Gangplank into Mundo, Gangplank into a lot of other matchups is now a lane bully. It's not necessarily true against Yorick, and Yorick has his own set of styles. We're actually planning a segment on Countdown that I'm going to spoil a little bit here about solo queue picks and maybe why we're seeing more of them in pro and why we didn't see them in pro in the past. And this is pro play always has roles and responsibilities for each position.
Yeah.
There was a long time that nothing was a viable jungle in pro unless he had an escape, because it was so incredibly important to be able to get a ward in enemy territory or check vision and then get out. That's why Sejuani was one of the first tanks that could be played in the jungle, because you just save your Q. If they see you, you jump out. Rek'Sai, they see you, you dash out. Lee Sin, you ward jump out. Right? Elise, you repel out. All those things are true. So a jungler had to be so overloaded like Xin Zhao if you ever wanted to see him in pro, because well, he's got an in but not an out.
And Skarner is similar. Right?
Exactly. So a pick like Yorick, who literally can't team fight. He can be as strong as you want in these 1v1s, but unless he's last hit enough minions with his Q to get his ghouls out so he can actually do maximum damage and he can get his main out in the side lane, he is the most extreme version of a split pusher. That the rest of your team needs to redecide the way they want to play the game in order to see this pick, which is why I think there's a large barrier for solo queue picks to be seen in pro. Same thing with Quinn, same thing with Yorick. I do think that this split, because there has been more experimentation with Mage's bot and people have kind of unlocked their role understanding of the game, we're more likely to see those picks. But I think that's why we haven't seen Yorick as a counter to the GP until recently.
I think Yorick is also, like you said, the most extreme version, right? But I also think that there's lots of picks that are like more plug and play. You know what I mean? It's like, is Kled, Aurelia, or Camille? Well, not exactly, but like, can it kind of fit in the same group? Well, kind of, right? You know, like, so it's like, well, it turns out you can kind of actually just play this mid or top or whatever, and it's probably fine, but maybe has some better matchups. So I think that there is, you know, more opportunities where, like, you know, there's champions that aren't popular in pro, but you know, even Worlds last year, where people said Caitlyn couldn't work, right? Caitlyn has been in pro so many times, but people, just because it was Ardent Sensor meta, and it's like, no, you have to play hyperscaling, you have to play for late game, right? Like, people just like kind of write a lot of these things off. But anyway, the other thing I wanted to talk about a bit for A15 was actually the support item cost changes. I actually
50
think
gold
this
up.
is pretty big. So essentially just supports are going to start with one less potion. My immediate assumption when I read that is, oh my God, mage supports are back. Like, you know, like, when you think about the Braum and the Tahm Kench and the Alistar and these guys, for them it's about withstanding the poke and then being able to, when your jungler comes or whatever, you pull off the all-in. So to me, this makes Brand, Zyra, like Karma, you know, all these sorts of like pokey champions, even like Felka support and these sorts of things, so much better, because you just have 150 less health essentially to work with in lane thanks to that potion. Like, that makes it so much easier to hit that threshold where they're then forced to take a bad base or forced to like, you know, get poked off the turret or maybe even just dove or whatever. So I think that, like, despite, you know, whether there's going to be big swings in win rates, probably not, because I feel like
looking
this
at
stuff
Zyra online, it's like not anywhere.
Exactly. Like, I feel like usually this stuff doesn't show us up that much in solo queue because people do not execute on advantages as much, and there's too many other mistakes. In pro, I feel like that should really bump up the priority of poke bot, and that's something that I'm going to be interested to see if that kind of comes through.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that.
The other way that I can see that going is the supports just take biscuit delivery.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
And you obviously lose that because you're not able to take another rune. But I have a side theory that biscuit delivery is actually a little bit OP in pro, because everything's about uptime and staying in lane, and that's why we see teleports. And if you just biscuit through the poke, then sweet, you're good. You still get to play tank. You still get to play your engage. But I think that's a more impactful change than a lot of people are giving it credit for.
Yeah, I agree. Uptime's a really big deal. It's interesting because this is something that Azale was looking at a while ago, which is like Ignite and Ghost and stuff is like way higher win rate top lane on most top laners than Teleport is, and like substantially so.
And that was before the teleport nerf.
Yeah, it was before it got nerfed by another 20% of its cooldown. Yeah. So my theory that I build predictioned was we'll start to see it in solo queue like by the end of the year, before Worlds, and then that might trickle into pro by the end, where it's like, actually it's so abusive being Ghost Darius that you can't CS literally ever. It's worth being able to TP bot once in a while. Like, maybe that can start to happen, but obviously like cross map play is a really big deal.
Yeah.
Ready to move on? We used to be in a world in pro where like you would run Ignite top, and it was like only Shen would global.
Yeah. We also lived in a pro where Tarek Garen was the best
true.
bot lane ever.
Yeah.
Then people realized,
bring it back, baby.
Bring it back.
Time to move on to North American LCS. We've had a year's worth of parity, and every game feels like an upset. Yet finally, we have an 8-4 team against another 8-4 team, the two teams that are in first, playing each other right off the bat to give us a clear first place team. Team Liquid's 8-4, 100 Thieves 8-4. They met in the finals last year. They're first place again. Who will win? I lost the energy on the end there, but it's still an
100
exciting
Thieves
point.
will win.
All right.
I told you I'd go
What do you
for
think about the matchup?
strong statements. I think it's a very interesting matchup, right? I think 100 Thieves are back on form. I think we were all very worried, or a lot of people were worried that if Funnel's gone, they couldn't win because they were like 2-4 with non-Funnel and 4-0 with it.
And then they won 2 games.
And then they went 2-0, so another 50%. It also feels like Liquid's imploding.
But they won 2 games last week.
They did, but they're going to keep imploding, and it's going to get worse.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I think
Why?
100 Thieves, if you look at Twitter and Doublelift streams.
So you're basically saying the relationship between Doublelift and Ole
Is
is
deteriorating.
too toxic for them to succeed on stage.
I think if it doesn't bite them right now, like I still think they're pretty close, but like I can't imagine this team working well long term. And to be fair, like
Yeah.
I think there've been plenty of examples in sports of like teams that hate each other, but they win anyway.
Yep.
Like that totally exists. So like maybe I'm totally barking up the wrong tree because evidence has shown me otherwise, but I feel like it's close enough that like the relationship getting worse is going to make the team worse.
Yeah, I mean, so just some examples of maybe the things like Ole had a tweet, when I give you criticism, you don't know how to take it. Laughy, crying face. How can you give me criticism to me? If you don't want to feel bad, don't make other people feel bad first. But then there's stuff like Doublelift streaming to 20,000 people, and his Tom Kench alts into the middle of the other team, and in chat, Doublelift says Ole, question mark, question mark.
Yeah.
Like, it's a joke, right? But
It feels bad.
there's some baggage
Totally
there.
truth in there.
Especially because I was watching the stream and he's like, "Oh, this guy's griefing," like kind of like
Yeah.
playing it up about like how bad it was, and then he's like, "Ole," and you're just like, "Ooh," and like, yeah, like you said, it's kind of a joke, but those feel so bad because it's similar to the Piglet thing for me, where it's like, I do not believe that doesn't get back to Ole, right? When there's 20,000 people watching, someone is clipping that out and sending it to
tweeting
Ole. Someone is like linking it to him or whatever, right? Or maybe Ole's already watching the stream himself. but like either way, that just
Exactly,
feels
yeah.
so bad.
Yeah.
And like you can like hate a person on your team or whatever, like on a friend level. You don't have to be best friends to do well. Like I've had teammates where we never really hung out outside the game, but as long as you can get along well inside the game. And that's the really important thing. It just has to like not cross that threshold, right? Like as long as you can be respectful of each other and still have trust in each other.
Yeah.
But that's hard.
But listen, I think Doublelift and Ole had one of their best weeks together last week.
Yeah.
That's true.
So it is something that is clearly volatile. I don't necessarily think it will sink them. I do want to talk about 100 Thieves a little bit as well, though, because they are one of the least impressive, consistently good teams I've seen in a really long time. And I think recently I am starting to appreciate more what makes them good. And it is the fact that they don't really let you fight them ever. They just actually have a really good mid-game sense of getting vision, controlling vision, managing side waves, and only taking the fights that will be beneficial to them. The Oracle's Elixir, another really good stat site, specifically, my favorite stat on there is, I'm going to make sure
Early
I get
game
it
and
right,
late game rating?
is the early game rating and the late game rating. And essentially, Tim, the guy who runs this website, I've explained it a few times, has this formula that takes in all of the games from the summer split of all the regions he tracks. It's gold and Drakes at 15 minutes, and then kind of what percentage on average does this team win based on the average advantage that they have.
Yeah.
And then whatever isn't the early game rating compares to their win percentage and gives you their mid to late rating, which is, all right, well, how good is this team actually at closing out games?
Yeah.
Because if you're always a 90% win in the first 15 minutes, the highest your mid-late rating could be is 10 if you win 100% of your games, right? But 100
not
Thieves,
tested.
Exactly. But 100 Thieves' early game rating is 46, which means they are actually below average, because 50 would be average, 15 minutes into the game. But then their mid-late rating is 20.7, which means they're winning 20% more games than expected based on their post-15-minute play. So that is clearly where this team is the best. That's the best mid-late rating in the entire league. It's actually a very high mid-late rating, even when compared to other regions. For instance, COG has the worst mid-late rating at negative 13.
They're the best early game, but
They get
they're
every
down to
first
6.
blood, but they always lose.
And that matters. And I think so often we're used to seeing this perception of League of Legends of if a team has an advantage and you play properly, you should always win. Therefore, the most important thing is getting that advantage in the first place. Even if we reference Piglet's interview at the start, we took Zyracon low at level 1. From that position, we should win.
I hit 2 Qs on Ezra. The
Right?
game was over.
And you can extend that argument to absurdity, but there is very clearly things you have to execute and things you can do to stop to outsmart the team. And that's really where 100 Thieves shines.
And it's interesting. Like, I think that's really cool that you bring that up and that it is actually tracked somewhat, because that is also like explains a lot of why when you watch them it doesn't feel super impressive, because it's not like there's all these sick outplays and they're just killing everyone, or they're just like closing the game so fast. But that is a skill that doesn't, I don't think, translate super well to the viewing experience, right? As far as like it's hard to appreciate. You're just like, well, they just kind of don't fight, right? But if that is actually your objective, only taking advantageous fights, always knowing where the other people are, like, not only do you have to have really good vision, but you have to have, I feel, very, very good intuition and understanding of where they could be, where they might be, like, and playing very well around that. Because, like, as someone who loves to split push and loves playing, like, you know, like side lane, high farm style stuff, I've played a bajillion games where it's like, all we have to do is like not get caught, and like, you know, I'm 150 CS up on Kale or whatever, right? But it's like, the amount of times that the team then gets caught, it's not easy to do. Oftentimes, it's actually the harder job for the 4-man squad to stay safe and still have some semblance of pressure and vision on the map than it is for that guy who's like split pushing, who kind of ends up being the star or whatever, you know. And that's something that they obviously do incredibly well, right? Like they're not getting caught, they're not giving up those disadvantageous fights, and that speaks very highly, I think, about their vision and about their intuition.
I have a question for, I guess, both of you then.
Okay.
How do you sort of, I guess, reconcile 100 Thieves being super passive, weak early game, but the best or almost the best team in the league, versus TSM, who is super passive, does nothing, and just rolls over? Is it that 100 Thieves then does things late game, or is it still, we don't want to fight you? It's just Sunday's actually so good that he's creating pressure.
I actually think a lot of it is that. I actually think that you have to have some place on the map that is exerting pressure, that is doing things, right? It doesn't have to be everyone, doesn't have to be the whole squad, but you need someone who's drawing pressure, someone who's creating advantages. And to be fair, I think Afromu and Kodesem, people talk very highly about that bottom lane too, and that kind of draws some pressure in and of itself. But I think Someday has been the best performing top laner, and he is someone that is able to create advantages. He's someone that is able to make TP plays, to get lane advantages. Like that alone, I think, is such a big difference. I don't feel like Haunter has been doing that for himself or for TSM in the same way that he has in the past. And to me, that's actually just the biggest difference. Like, you can play TSM style if Bjergsen or Haunter or Sven is up like 50 CS every game or is doing whatever. Like, if one guy is like smashing people and everyone's having to come to him, it gives time for the other guys to sit back and farm up and get to that point.
Yeah, but let's actually play this game. Team Solo Mid's early game rating is 42.9.
Okay,
which is low, but it's
slightly lower.
It's only 3% lower than 100 Thieves.
Yeah,
but their mid late rating is negative 1.2.
So they actually have worse. They actually do worse than their gold leads indicate. So they actually aren't doing.
Not only are they not good early, they're also not good late. However, let's just compare that to previous iterations of TSM. So actually, the last time TSM won the split was NA LCS summer 2017. They also did not have a good early game rating, 49.2.
Okay.
The best early game rating in the LCS that split was Cloud9 at 59. Right? But their mid-late rating was 24.
Yeah.
Because they still won roughly 75% of their games because they were so good at that stage in the game. So this split, if we're kind of reconciling TSM's weaknesses, they're actually not that much worse early game than they were in 2017 when they won the split. They are just that much worse after 15 minutes.
So my opinion is, I would say going from 49 to 42 is a pretty substantial jump.
It is.
I mean, like you're going to be hard pressed to find a team at like 30, right? Where like they're that far down in gold.
Exactly. Like H2K is the lowest in everything I found, and their early game rating is 24.
Okay, yeah, but that's like literally 0-14, like actually like flaming garbage.
One of the
But that
worst
also just
teams in
means
all professional
that also just
play.
means though, in like on average, in 24% of their
25%
games,
chance to
teams
win.
can win.
Yeah.
Right, and they just haven't done it ever.
And they're also minus 25 in late game because
Exactly.
they aren't.
And
because they never won.
as soon as you started talking about that, I was super curious because I always think back 2016 TSM summer when
I got that
felt
one. They had an insane.
yeah.
So
I'm looking at it right now.
they had an insane early game.
73.3 early game rating, and then their mid late game rating is also 12, which means 12
Yeah.
above that.
That
So,
early game rating was the highest of all teams in all regions.
yeah, that's what I figured.
And if we talk about people's perception of what makes a good team, like that's why that TSM team was so hyped. Because typically speaking, when I've tracked this, like whatever your early game rating is how good people think you are.
Yeah,
Because that's just how people are trained to read League of Legends.
and as long as you're
it's-
closing out very frequently.
As long as you're closing out most of the time.
Yeah.
But even if you're not closing out, you're thinking, oh man, they got a good early game rating.
Yeah.
That just means they got a few things to clean up, and then
Yeah.
they're going to be a good team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess you're right. Like it is a salvageable early game, not as good as last year, sure, but like a salvageable early game. And then they're also just like they're not finding their ways back into the mid game. I would be curious, I guess, like. Never mind. Actually,
What do you
it's
got?
control. I was thinking like the meta game changing around, right? Or like where Baron's better and Elder
Yeah.
Dragon exists, but like
It
that's already
changes.
controlled for by the stat
Correct.
of the odds of win.
This stat doesn't actually work at the
Yeah.
start of splits because he cuts it off whenever like a preseason
Yeah.
patch, and it's actually going to be probably less accurate this split only because the meta has changed so much, and he's still
Over
pulling
the
all those
course
games in.
of the
over the
split?
course of his data set.
Because the big thing about this stat is that's already like that's your chance of winning based on the game's already seen. So like like Baron being good is already controlled for in the statistics. So it's not
Yes.
like
Yes.
like late game stats are different now. It's like no, they're this good based on the game they're literally playing. So I mean they just objectively have worse shot calling, which is weird because that's why they got Mithy. Is like we're gonna cut Doublelift and Biofrost to grab Zen and Mithy. Oh, by the way, they're laning worse. Oh, and their shot calling's worse. So it was like statistically a strict downgrade. Not that Sven's not having a decent split.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know. We started talking about Team Liquid and 100 Thieves, but you brought up the shot calling point, and apparently everything is about TSM. But I was thinking about this the other day.
How many
is-
degrees of separation?
Yeah, until you talk about TSM.
yeah.
And that's the
Always
thing. All of Travis's interviews, the way he gets viewed is he just asks the player about TSM
Yeah.
and then puts that in the headline.
Cody's
Son thinks TSM.
Double lift on TSM.
Yeah. It's like, ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Thinking about players' strengths and weaknesses, Mithy has always played with a mid laner who is very aggressive and initiates freely, from Peke to Perks.
Yeah.
That's just been what he's played with. And when he hasn't had that, was Mithy on the team with Power of Evil for like half a split when they were struggling?
Yeah, because he
right?
called him an old teammate.
Yeah, and Power Evil wasn't as aggressive back then. I find that interesting. As Mithy has been, he's very good at controlling the game, but he's not that great at being the one who pulls the trigger. And Bjergsen also is not that great at being the one who pulls the trigger, but is great at controlling the game. So they need to find that strength.
You need a pressure valve. Doesn't matter who it is,
Yeah.
but they need someone. And
Yeah.
another interesting match that we're going to have is going to be Optic and FlyQuest. FlyQuest keeps winning. I mean, they've had some pretty ridiculous games. And Optic, I mean, 4-0 in their last 5. FlyQuest is, off the top of my head, maybe 5-2 in their last 7 or something like
I mean,
that.
their stat with JJ is 6-2, right?
6-2. Okay,
They
so
just
6.
came in at
Yeah.
week,
So 6-2.
3.
Optic has won their last 4. Both these teams obviously doing very well. Both these teams did very poorly in spring and have kind of improved a lot. I'm just honestly really excited to see if Optic is going to be able to continue along this kind of style of doing their own thing and making it work, right? Obviously, PoE is kind of known for like, you know, all his Nashor's 2 stuff and his Victor and his different things and his Smite mid talent and all these cool things. But it was really cool to see Dokla, who I don't consider to be one of the top guys in the league as far as top lane. He was the focus for this. It wasn't just about PoE.
Yeah.
It was about enabling him
Yeah.
and, you know, playing these kind of more solo queue style answers to these champions and having it work. The team played well around it. I thought that was very exciting. And it showed, like, you know, from the outside looking in, it feels like those guys actually are like good friends, and it feels like it's kind of this group of friends, and they seem to have a really positive attitude. And it feels like there's not many of those teams right now. It feels like there's a lot of pressure and stress around a lot of teams. Optic just seems like they're having fun,
Yeah.
and they're kind of believing in each other, and it's working. So I'm just really excited to see if they can keep doing this, whether it's like, like focus on bot lane or whether it's focused on top lane, doesn't matter. I just like the fact that they're bringing out some of these objectively strong solo queue picks and making it work.
I mean, I hard agree with you. Like that's my initial stance, right? Is I love when a team is willing to say, look, this is our play style, or at least like we're willing to change our play style, and at least whether it's for the match or for the week or maybe for the long term, I don't know. Is like, hey, they had stuff ready, and I like that CLG wanted to have this 5 melee comp like against Nocturne to go for the hard dive, sort of like a tower rush kind of team. I like they played split push twice in a row, and it's funny because I'm on the one hand, like I remember talking with an LCS top laner who's like, split push is not viable, full stop, when asking about like Fiora versus Aatrox, and then lo and behold, Optic, the underdog perennially, right, wins with
Has
it.
won two split push games.
Two straight split push games, right? And so the then thought I want to give on that is, look, you might not be super practiced on split push, but this breaks into 2 points. So one is people have their own innate play styles, and Dokla, more fresh out of solo queue than most players, is going to be more comfortable split pushing than playing, I think, standard team fight in general, and more comfortable playing Fiora than Maokai in general. That's like that was his innate play style back in academy and whatnot. So I think he's going to feel more comfortable. And then yes, the rest of your team must play around this and like learn to play split push on competitive, which can be hard. But you've put in, let's say, a week of scrims playing Fiora and Yorick and all these weird top laners that are split pushers. Your opponents have played 0. Right. So even if you're not 30 games in super practiced, you're 10 games in super practiced, they're 0 games in. You've probably got a better read on how your game is going to play out than they do.
Especially with Yorick, right?
Right.
Like, no one plays.
No one scrimmed against Yorick.
Yeah. Couple interesting things to add on there. JJ said on the desk he had a theory about why some of last split's bottom tier teams were good now. And he said we all had to scrim each other because the top teams were only scrimming the top teams, but then the bottom teams, he thinks, had a better read on which champions were good. So they practiced the good champions, they learned how the good champions worked, and then they played against the good teams with the good champions, and guess what? The team with the good champions was actually the good teams. So we swapped it a little bit. I think that's cool. Now the scrims have opened up a little bit more, he says, so I think he thinks it's going to equalize. But I also think FlyQuest and Optic both have something in common in the fact that they credit a decent amount of their success to the new support they didn't have in Summer Split, who is helping them a lot with late game shot calling, right? JJ has been great, and Big has been great for Optic in calling their rotations, getting the proper vision down, and making that part of the game work. And for us, that is one of the most difficult things to appreciate from the outside, right? It is so difficult watching the League of Legends game from the spectator point of view with essentially Fog of War disabled to be able to see how good a team's decisions are and how well they are training the map. That's why 100 Thieves is the best, but that's where I think these two teams have made the biggest strides towards their improvement.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting, and it's cool to see. Like, we've heard from some players that they have a lot of confidence in Big, a guy who like not a lot of players have kind of really talked about in the past, and not a lot of people have really talked about. But it seems like they have a lot of confidence in him and what he's doing, and I think that's exciting for their team, right? For both these teams, it's legitimate improvements. I would say definitively these teams are much better than they were in spring. If they are the best teams, that remains to be seen. I would say probably not.
How much of it is a mirage, right? We have a 7-5 FlyQuest and a 6-6 Optic. Can they maintain this win rate for the rest of the split, or are they going to miss playoffs?
I think it's possible for them to make playoffs. Certainly, I feel like they are playing the game more intelligently than other teams, but I still don't think that like talent wise they are higher. So like that is where it becomes tough, right? Because it's like, sweet Dokla, you played Fiora and you played Yorick, like that was really cool. Your team played well around you, but like, can Huni still not just do that way better than him, right? And like I would say probably he can, right? And that is where it becomes tough, because like if you innovate, but someone then just does your strategy better than you, then like, well, it's exactly, it's easier to like pick up the Yorick than it is to like last hit perfectly and like, and play the map better and do all these things that are just like make a better player.
Yeah, and that's up to the willingness. It's up to, is this actually an optimal strategy, or do they fluke into the win? Which you could say, and I'm not going to argue that too heavily. And then, okay, if it is optimal strategy, will the other teams learn it? Like, will Echo Fox start learning Yorick? And is Yorick the right answer when Gangplank is blind picked? And like that's the new thing. That's a new innovation. Just like I think it was a Phreak. It was like, oh, Ardent Sensor's good, and like that got them some wins. And then everyone's like, you're right, Ardent Sensor's good. And then they didn't make Worlds. And then everyone played Ardent Sensor, and it's like, okay, well, we had our advantage for 2 weeks.
But that's still good coaching. You should still be doing this, even if it doesn't work out long term.
And
Because
absolutely, because you picked up a bunch of wins, and maybe they get 6th now, and it's like, wow, this is our best split ever. That was super good. Like, and you still get credit for that.
And the teams
you get credit for being
aren't playing with even pieces, right? Like it's like not the playing field is not even. There are players that are better than other players. There are teams that spend more money than other teams in sector, right? So you just do the best that you can with what you have.
And I think like the general idea of like the meta is cyclical, that like there's always a next step. Like if you are actually just god of coaching and like as Optic, you're like, okay, Yorick's meta, well here's the next counter pick. So that next time like we pick Gangplank and you pick Yorick, we flex Gangplank mid and we just like hard screw your top laner with our next counter pick. Oh, and by the way, we won this game too. Like, oh, also we don't know how split push works because we did it last week.
I can already tell you it. It's Kled.
There you go, right? CLG knew.
Yeah, he matches the split push and then he team fights. Yay!
And he's really good at starting it, right? And it's like, but also they had the head start. They've got their extra week of scrims of knowing what split push looks like. So like, I think it is inconsistent but possible to stay ahead of the meta at all times. You have to then read if your opponent's going to keep up with you or not. But like,
it's true.
I think that's doable.
Let's talk about Echo Fox a little bit because they had that huge trade deadline move where they switched out basically 3 players on the roster. They put Smoothie and Lost together in the bottom lane. They had DeMonte in the mid lane as usual. They looked amazing in one game, but then they lost the next game against Cloud9 in what was actually a Cloud9 comeback because Echo Fox had some of the early game advantages. Yeah. Personally, for Echo Fox, I have a lot of hope for this team.
Me too.
I think they have the potential to be the best team in the league.
I also agree.
But it requires some luck, and it requires the pieces to fit together. Huni and Dardoch have very strong personalities, and Smoothie has been told that he talks too much. If they can reconcile that, which is a big if, and if Huni can find a way to keep the good parts of Huni, but also not just be dead all the time so that Smoothie can actually shot call properly, they could be amazing.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to do as well, though, because they're working with, even though they talk about the culture and the coaching structure, they've lost their coach. They're going with ThinkCard as the head coach. They're changing a lot with very little time. But we talked about this on the analyst desk as well. 9 games in a spring split, we had Dardoch, Huni, and Smoothie as MVP candidates, and now they have all of them on the same team. So when you talk about talent, this team has talent. It's just going to be a matter of reconciling that talent, having Lost and DeMonte fit in that puzzle while looking pretty good. And then I actually think the sky's the limit for this team if they can pull that off.
I think the most encouraging thing about this squad for me was that, you know, Smoothie and Lost actually looked good right from the word go. They were winning lanes in both games. Lost looked good individually. I thought Smoothie looked good individually. And that is something that very often I feel like bot lanes just don't click or take a really long time to get going. So like Huni was the worst player on Echo Fox this last weekend. Like he didn't have the best weekend, and they went 1-1 with brand new players, right? Like I think that Huni can get back to where he was. I think that Huni is extremely talented, and you know he is like that pressure valve that we talked about for kind of the other teams need. I think that he just goes too far with it sometimes. So you know if he can rein it back a little bit. You know, it's also going to open up more space for him to be crazy aggressive if his bot lane is winning. If your bot lane is winning, then it's harder for the jungler to just blind walk up there and just punish you over and over and over. Because if he does, then your bot lane takes the turret. Then your bot lane does a dive. Then you get the dragon. And then those trades, it's not just Huni dying for nothing, it's Huni dying for something. And that's more okay. So I'm also very positive about this team. I just feel like their bot lane just got better. It feels like DeMonte has performed very well individually. I think this is a really good team.
I think even their mid lane got better. I'm looking at stats for DeMonte. 6 games in, 50% first blood percentage. He has the highest goal difference at 10 of any player who wasn't being funneled. So like the people above him are like Wild Turtle, Huni, definitely an Altec. So he's above all mid laners in gold. And again, 6 games in, right? That's a decent number.
Rift Rivals, he was really good too, though.
Yeah, like I think he's legitimately a great mid laner, completely deserves starting the LCS. Like he's a resident, which is helpful for like compositions as well. Like this is a team with 3 winning lanes, or it can be 3 winning lanes. Smoothie, we know it can be a great shot caller. Huni's got that World Finals experience, MSI champion. Like this team, as you're mentioning, like can be super sick, and all the pieces really are there.
All right, now that we've built them up, let's talk about teams that are tied for 6th.
Yeah,
really quickly, just TSM, COG, and C9. I think this is one of the weird things about this split and why everything kind of feels off is the fact that you look at the popular teams of LCS history. Team Solo Mid, number 1. Arguably Cloud9, number 2.
Yeah.
And arguably COG, number 3.
Yeah.
They're all tied for 6th. So now you have like 80% plus of the league's teams that they identify with as fans are not that good. They're losing more than half their games. So everything feels topsy-turvy, and it's hard to find that team to root for. For a lot of people, it is going to be 100 Thieves, Team Liquid, or Echo Fox, or even FlyQuest because they're winning right now. But that's just kind of an aside that I was thinking about.
I'm getting nervous for a bet. Cloud9's not looking so far away from playoffs.
When Cloud9 was 1-5, and I told Azale, mainly because of their early game rating, by the way,
yeah.
that they were going to be able to
this
pull it
hard.
around. Yeah, they can't keep losing that badly. They're up to 5-7. They had some quality wins last week, but all of these teams are tied for 6th with Golden Guardians as well. Optic is the team in 5th, and then above that, you got teams at 7 and 5. So there's a lot of teams that are going to miss out here.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think has the best chance of making it in
Going up
from here on out?
I mean, it feels like TSM. Like, it's funny because we talked about this last week, and Kobe initially was like, TSM's not going to make playoffs, and he's like, wait, no, just kidding, they're going to make playoffs. I take it back. But TSM has been on such a slide. They're 1-5, 1-6. Let me check. In their last, 1-5 in their last 6. Right, like this team has been on a very
4-2.
Yeah, they are on a pretty heavy downward trend. Right, they're like on the opposite trajectory of C9 and stuff. Like CLG also feels like they're going very much downhill. TSM feels kind of mental boom to me. It feels like they're stuck in this rut, and it's a similar kind of repeating set of problems. There is like at this point in time, I feel like there is more hope for C9 because of their trajectory, because of like the recency of their good performances. That it makes you feel like, hey, they've maybe figured some more things out. Whereas TSM feels like they're struggling. Nothing's really changing that much unless they can really like have some sort of a shift. It feels hard to see them just like completely turning it around.
Let's compare schedules just for the next week.
Yeah.
TSM plays Golden Guardians and Echo Fox.
Okay.
C9 plays Clutch Gaming and CLG. And CLG plays Echo Fox and C9.
Yeah.
So CLG to me has the hardest schedule with Echo Fox and C9. TSM also has got a tough one because they play,
Echo Fox
technically
also,
tough
but Golden
one.
Guardians.
Golden Guardians is an opportunity.
Yeah.
A huge opportunity because that's a team they're directly tied with, and Echo Fox is above them.
It's interesting you're like implying Cloud9's a better team than Golden Guardians. Not that I disagree, but like technically they're facing the same records. 'Cause I think they're both playing Fox, right? In the same as Sergio?
Cloud9 plays, they play Clutch. That's why they have
sorry.
the easier schedule.
Okay.
Because Clutch is
You're right.
definitively in last.
Well, and it's funny though. Like you're going through it, and you're like, this team, and I'm just thinking, I'm like, that's pretty hard because the whole league doesn't really
hard.
feel like there's any super easy.
There are no
teams,
free wins.
Yeah.
right. Like I'm just trying to think through my head, and I'm just like, because I'm looking at TSM, and I'm just looking at like, okay, who have they already played? Who have they still yet to play? But everyone has a lot of wins. Everyone is pretty close, right? Like. Even though you still like, because it's so drilled into us, TSM makes every finals. TSM always makes worlds. TSM is one of the top teams, right? Like it's always there in your head. Like you still think, oh, well, maybe they could kind of like, get it back or scrape in or whatever. But like, there's no easy wins. They're sitting in 6th. Certainly they can do it, but like just as likely they could not. Like this does not feel like an inevitable improvement for TSM as it has sometimes in the past when they've had a slow start. You're like, yeah, okay, well it's a slow start, but they're getting better every week. They're really learning. That individually they're still amazing. Bjergsen hasn't had amazing individual performances, I feel like, besides maybe the Talon game or something. Hanser has looked pretty average. Their bot lane, I think Sven has looked good individually, but like their bot lane as a whole has looked pretty average.
Yeah.
Phreak is kind of just there. It doesn't feel like this is an amazing team, and unless they can change something, easy enough for TSM to miss playoffs.
Yeah, and Bjergsen actually is one of the like slightly more positive parts of TSM. Like looking at laning stats, he's positive in all the metrics. Gold XP.
He's certainly good, but compared to what you expect,
this is a guy who was like a perennial MVP candidate or the
Yep.
actual MVP. He's got like 6 trophies or 5 or whatever, and like
No one
he's
else has won 2 MVPs in NA, and Bjergsen's won 4.
Yeah, and so he's a good mid laner. 4-time MVP is a good mid laner. It's like, okay, that's not the same. And I remember this is something that I remember you guys on the analysis got flack for either last split or last year. You're like you made fun of Bjergsen or like maligned Bjergsen for like a fairly weak Xerath performance. And on Twitter it was like, you can't make fun of Bjergsen. He played everything literally perfectly. He's like, dude, he's the best mid laner of all time in North America. And he did pretty well.
Yeah, he
like
split
that's not
lane
okay.
with Keen. Congratulations.
Yeah, that's not okay to his pedigree, right?
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, I mean, and that's part of why TSM won, right? Like, let's make sure we're aware of that. Is like Bjergsen was the actual sickest mid laner ever. Now he's a slightly above average mid laner. TSM will be worse if your star player is no longer the actual best.
Yeah, and a bunch of other reasons. I want to talk about COG as well because we talked about TSM a whole bunch.
We keep coming back to that.
Yeah. Done talking about TSM. They're not very good. At the end, we'll see what happens next week with them. But COG is also on a 4-game losing streak. Yeah. Right after everyone was super happy because they were 5-3, they wake up and they're 5-7. And a lot of the same problems from Spring Split are kind of happening again. They have some random deaths everywhere. They don't look that cohesive as a team. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be difficult for them to reconcile that, especially because last split, their solution was giving Biofrost the keys. And now that they've done that, and that has kind of had its run of success and then fallen back to not being successful, I think they're in, again, some very real trouble. And they're up against Echo Fox, who that's going to be a big gut check because Echo Fox is still figuring out whether or not that roster is all going to coexist. And then they play C9, who looks like they're finally getting it together. So this, to me, is the make or break week for COG. If they can make it, then everything is going to have motivation for the rest of the split. They just beat 2 good teams. They're kind of back on track. But if they go to a 6-game losing streak, I think it's over for them.
It feels to me like CLG is like, the opposite of what happened with Optic, where they both brought out these pretty cool like ideas or whatever, and like one worked really well and one really didn't, right? Like the Kled funnel, I can see the idea there. It obviously failed pretty spectacularly. The Renekton mid as a counter, I think that makes a lot of sense. Didn't work out, right? So it's kind of interesting because it's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Like it is things that like maybe would be really good in solo queue, but it doesn't always work out, right? And it's important to also remember that it's like, at the end of the day, it's a percentages game, right? Like you talked about the GP versus Yorick thing, 58%, and that's like an astounding win rate for a champion, right?
And you still lose 4 out of 10.
Exactly, right? Like, and slightly more than that, and that is something that you have to remember. So even if the strategy is sound, and I don't really think the Kled one maybe was, but
sure,
it's not always going to work out, and there is some element of like randomness or whatever in each game too. But CLG again, it's like, it always feels like, I feel like mentality of the team is so important, and maintaining faith in each other. And it feels like so much with some of these teams, it starts to feel like they were so happy before. Like when you talk to Huhi, when he was on NA LCS tonight, and some of these guys, like all their interviews feel so confident. And I feel like a lot of that has been lost, in recent weeks because of these struggles. And that makes me kind of doubt the team when the players don't feel like they have the answers. It makes you think, okay, well, maybe they don't.
Yeah. Final thoughts, Phreak, before I go to Twitter?
I mean, I'm looking at the Optic wins, and they were against TSM, Cloud9, CLG Guardians, so they beat all the 6th place teams, which, hey, that's their main competition.
And
they
also
got
the
there.
3 most popular teams in the history of North America.
Well, sure, but it's to sort of give context to like, the Optic wins were good, but they were against wins that are
teams that are now low in standings.
And teams that are negative in win rate anyway.
Correct.
Right? That like even if they beat Optic, they would still be 50-50 at best. Whereas like the CLG losses, 100 Thieves and Team Liquid are 2 of those 4. The actual 2 best teams in the league.
True.
And again, some of those are because they won and lost those games.
It makes sense.
But like, schedule is a thing.
Yeah. Still make or break for them. Even if they have easier teams at the end of the split.
Yeah.
All right, Twitter questions. We got 2 of them that we're going to touch on this week. So iSlasher at twice iSlasher says, what is a common misconception or unknown fact about a champ you have been playing recently? I like this question because it's like, what have you been playing? What's a cool TIL? Azael, I know I want you to do Yorick, even if you haven't been playing him recently.
Okay.
Because I think he's a champion that just got some prevalence. But
Yorick, I mean, I'm trying to think of an unknown fact. I mean, okay, so one thing I will say is that like, this is something that I feel like a lot of people don't really realize is that, so like you get essentially percentage HP damage every time you hit someone when the maiden is hitting them. So you have to actually be like kind of like proccing that and hitting the person. You don't just want to like stick your goals on it. I'd also say just like, I think a lot of people don't understand the importance of the goals themselves, right? So it's like, it's often actually, you have a better chance of winning a fight by like getting your 3rd Q on a minion to like spawn your goals than using that Q on the person, because the goals do such a tremendous amount of damage. So I guess just the kind of importance there. And then maybe one little kind of cool thing I have with Kled is it's actually bad to spend your skill point in the early game. Like you actually want to hold a skill point for W, and you can often get very good advantages by like, you hold your W level up until you dismount, and then you pop it. So you have the 4 quick attacks, because that gives you 20 courage per. Your shotgun gives you like 20 courage essentially, or 10, something like that. But anyway, like, so it essentially guarantees a remount in the early game if you hold your W. So it's actually better to not spend that skill point and save it and use it almost as an active.
It essentially uses that, as you're going to say,
a one-time active.
You get a first-time active, because last inning mini is not hard with that.
Yep.
Do you have any, Phreak?
I'm trying to think of one. I'm spending a lot of time. You can E-flash on Vayne.
And it redirects the way it shoots.
So yeah, I think my understanding of it is when Condemn actually hits, it then draws a line between you and them. So the bolt can be in the air, then you can flash, and then the bolt now is pushing them away from you. Or at the very, or maybe you have to cast it during the animation of prepping the spell. But either way, like going for big wall stuns because of E-flash is pretty big. Because I've done a lot of like missed wall stuns by like casting E, and they're like, "Yep, I heard the animation, and like I heard you cast it, and now I'm gonna walk this way, and then out I go." But if you redirect it, you can kind of like hide the animation because your model's moving across the map at 400 units instantly. And then you'll usually get the wall stun.
Yeah. I'm just, because I'm a one trick, I'm going to give you an Udyr thing.
Hell yeah.
It's not unknown or a misconception, but it's just something I see very few people do. If you're going to start Tiger, press Q when you're on the base, because then your first attack is going to apply Tiger, the dot, and then you're going to be able to press it again right away with full mana and with the cooldown up to essentially get 2 Tigers on your first camp. And also, if you want to clear with more health in the jungle, be clever with your turtle stance and keep track of where your stances are. So let's say you're a Tiger Udyr and it says a 2, which means essentially you'd have to hit twice more in order to get the dot. You should actually press turtle stance to get the shield, and then depending on how low you are, actually get your first auto for the % health heal, or then switch to your Tiger to get the damage from your Tiger right away. But the shield will persist and you will take less damage in the jungle. So if you have mana before every camp, actually just turtle as you're running through the jungle, then Tiger for the DPS, and you're going to stay at full health. So pretty just minor jungle optimizations, which make a big difference on Udyr.
Cool.
Next question. At Cryptosis, let's say that FlyQuest and a Phreak of Phreaks qualify for Worlds and go up against each other. As a play-by-play caster, Phreak, I want your answer. How would the casters go about casting Keen and Keen in the same game? A Phreak of Phreaks Keen is K-I-N, and then FlyQuest Keen is K-E-A-N-E.
Yeah.
How do you not make that extremely confusing for viewers?
Hey, I got a better one on top of this one, and it's more likely.
Sven and Sven.
Sven Skaren and Sven?
No. Team Liquid bring their sub top laner and go up against Griffin.
So Viper
Goes up against Viper. Yeah.
And
they're spelled
one has a 1 instead of an I, and the other has an I.
Okay,
right?
fine.
Because you actually can't have a name that is spelled exactly the same as someone else in the pro player database.
Yeah. I mean, either way, it's like, ooh, this is going to be really difficult. You probably, my first guess is I would call them
Champion name.
Exactly. By champion name, once you're in a context where it's not obvious anymore. Like, hey, here's Team Liquid's roster, and it's like, we're going to say his real name. No, we're going to call him Viper. But yeah, it'd be like, hey, here's FlyQuest with their mid laner Keen. And then like, okay, well, I'm really excited to see what Keen can do this game. No, I'm really excited to see what Oriana can do this game.
Yeah.
Right?
Although
and
you would have some fun. Be like, and Keen takes down Keen.
Yeah, whoa. Yeah, I mean, of course you would, right? At least, of course, I would.
At least they're not in the same lane.
Yeah, that helps. Good thing lane swamps aren't there. That'd be exciting. But yeah, I mean that's kind of the goal, right? Is you would immediately try to remove confusion by going champion name.
And Phreak would make lots of puns.
Of course I would, but that happens no matter what.
What's a pun with Keen and Keen? Oh no, they're just keen to do stuff.
Yeah, I mean, but like, I mean,
Ooh. Give me a clever
I don't like name puns that are like, here's the word just said again, right? Like, you want to be a little bit clever
He's
about
a
it.
pun purist.
Yeah.
I try to be a little bit, right?
He's not a pleb, Jack.
I'm not a pleb, and I know I've made fun of name puns and then used name puns as well, but
You've
sometimes
used
I have
every
low
pun.
standards.
Yeah.
You do have low standards.
I do have low standards.
Yes.
This is why I'm on this show.
Yeah.
Oh, that'll do it for this episode of The Dive. If you have any questions you want to ask
There's
on the
the
show,
Phreak
tweet
classic.
at RiotJet or at RiotAzael. Maybe Phreak if you want to be claimed.
No.
Otherwise, week 7 of the NA LCS starts this weekend. NA LCS Countdown starts at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday, and that will be followed by the battle for first place. Team Liquid versus 100 Thieves. See you then.